All right, everyone. Thank everybody for tuning in to yet another video broadcast here of Jesus Revealed. Here we are in day 11. We are in day 11 of Jesus Revealed. Again, I encourage everybody to repost, reshare, hashtag Jesus Revealed. Again, the YouTube page is Jesus Revealed. Facebook is just strictly my name, which is Sean George. And again, the Periscope page is Jesus_Revealed. Now, again, all the videos are uploaded on the YouTube page, day 1 up to day 11. And again, the YouTube page is Jesus Revealed. And so we're going to jump right into it tonight. Tonight, our Old Testament prophecy will be coming from the division of Psalms. We're in Psalms, the 41st chapter, and we're going to be looking at, we'll be strictly dealing with verse 9, but we're going to look at verses 5 through 9 in a sense, but we're strictly dealing with verse 9. Psalms 41, verse 9, and it reads, "Yea, my own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me." Now here we have the psalmist David, who was writing this chapter 41, and it starts out in verses 5 through 8. He talks specifically about who his enemies are, and he goes into a descriptive passages about who his enemies are, not naming them, but who they are and what they do, as far as being how they are verbally. Being an enemy, they verbally come against him. They link up with other of his enemies, and they all get together. So he's stating that he simply knows who his enemies are by their actions. So basically, he is very descriptive in the actions of his enemies. So he knows who his enemies are by their actions. And in fact, one thing he specifically says in verse 6, it says, "And if he come to see me, he speak vanity." Vanity meaning falsehood, meaning everything that he comes to say it's a pretend friendship. It's not authentic. There's nothing authentic about it. It is all fake. And when they come to him, David is able to recognize the fakeness in him. I know we all have some friends that they think that they are our friend, but we in turn know who they really are. And so when they come with that fakeness or that pretendness, we're able to spot that not only in their actions, but also by what they say and who they link up with. Notice that David says his enemies, they link up together. If you read verses 5 through 8, he talks a little about that. But this is very interesting in verse 9, because after he describes who his enemies are, verse 9 is very descriptive about a familiar friend. And he says, "Yea, mine own familiar friend," which means this is somebody, not just a friend, but somebody who is familiar with him, somebody that is in the close circumference of David, somebody that David brought into that secure zone in his life. And in fact, when you break this verse down a little bit more, and the theologians and the Bible scholars, they think they're able to pinpoint it to who David is specifically speaking about. And in fact, correct me if I am wrong with the pronunciation of this name, but here the theologians say Ahithophel. Again, Ahithophel is who they believe David is talking about, because when David says, "Yea, my own friend," it is also translated in the earlier transcripts. David is saying, "a man of my own peace." And if you research that a little bit further in 1 Kings and 2 Samuel and other parts of the division of Psalms, there is a man who David describes who was very close to him, and it was a man of his own peace, and he sat at the king's table and partaked in King David's food. So here we know that David is speaking specifically about someone. Now, also in this chapter, they don't know if David was crying out to the Lord in prayer, or if he was just speaking out loud, just crying out and voicing how he felt. So he was describing in verses 5 through 8 in descriptive actions of who his enemies are. But then he jumps down to verse 9 and he says, "Yet my own familiar friend," or yet a man of my own peace, meaning somebody that is very close to me, somebody who I let into my peace zone, somebody who I trusted around the closeness that nobody else was around, somebody who has been with me for a while. "Yet my own familiar friend, in whom I trusted." See, it wasn't just a familiar friend, but it was a friend that he trusted. See, we have many friends and we have many companions, but there's always that one friend, somebody that we can consider a man or a woman of our own peace, meaning they completely understand us. They're able to make eye contact, and we might not speak verbally, but when we make eye contact, they know what we are thinking. They know how we are feeling. It's somebody that is in that close circumference of a friendship zone. He says, "Yet a man of my own peace, a man who I have trusted, which means they had a past. They dealt with each other for a while. So again, the Bible scholars and theologians, they believe David is talking about Ahithophel. They say this is who he is almost certainly intended because of when he said, a man of my own peace. And he was one of David's official counselors. So he was always around David, which again, when he says a man who I have trusted, it had to be somebody that was always around David. And this is one of his official counselors, somebody that was always around the king's table. He says, listen to this, lifted up his heel against me. Now, see, this is where we get a little deeper in this, because when David was describing in verse 5 through 8 who his enemies were, it was always verbal. There was no type of physicality. There was no type of physical action that was taken between him and his enemies. Yet he was able to know who his enemy was just by the verbalism or through their body mannerisms. But here David says, a close friend, yet a man of my own peace, somebody who I trusted, had lifted up his heel against me. Now, here is where the scriptures get very discriminatory. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Very descriptive, because he said, lifted up his heel against me. Now, this is very particular, because when you study this, the way David is describing the actions of what this man has done to him is literally what a horse would do to his owner, when a horse would literally lift up his leg and kick his owner right in the face. So now if you think about that, David is saying, yet here is a man of my own peace, a man who I entrusted, a man who was always around me, a man who I brought to the table, who ate of my own bread, yet he lifted up his foot and literally kicked me in the mouth. He kicked me in the face. Not one of the enemies that I known by what they say and how they come against me, but he is saying, yet here is a man that I entrusted, yet he lifted up his foot and kicked me in the face. Now, he didn't literally do that, but if you think about what he did to hurt David, you think about that action, how he's describing the hurt in that action. If a horse was to kick his owner in the face, there is brutal force behind that. There was so much force and power in that action that it will cause so much physical pain, so much time to heal from that wound. Yet David is saying, this is how much this man hurt me. It hurt me so much that it is going to take so much time to heal from this, because he's not one who I considered one of my enemies, yet this was a man of whom I entrusted around me. Oh, God have mercy. It says he lifted up his heel. His conduct here again is compared to that of a vicious horse. Whew. Here is somebody he considered that was close to him, a man of his own peace that he entrusted, yet now he is comparing him to a vicious horse, which kicks his own master. That is so powerful and profound that he went from describing his enemies to then describing a man who he entrusted and comparing him to a vicious horse by his actions of what he did. Now, we are just talking about David here, and think about this. Even though this is the Old Testament prophecy, David was not knowingly speaking prophetically here, but he was simply stating how he felt. He was statingly saying how frustrated he was at that time dealing with his enemies. Then here is a man that he considered a friend, a close companion, a man who he entrusted, a man of his own peace, and yet he treated me like a vicious horse would kick his own master. All that I have done for this man, the amount of time that we have spent together and I have entrusted in him, now he has treated me like a vicious horse and literally has, like a vicious horse would kick his master. That's what I feel like he has just done to me. So here's David just speaking about how he felt, not knowing that what he was doing was actually, he was speaking in prophecy, because this is the prophecy, the same thing that Jesus would fulfill. Now, he's not speaking a prophecy that Jesus came to fulfill, but literally he was speaking how he felt, but it was so prophetic because Jesus has yet to come. And this is literally something that David was dealing with and going through. Oh, Lord have mercy. This is so powerful, because even though it hurt David, Jesus would come to fulfill what he went through. If we apply that to ourselves, no matter what we are going through, no matter the hurt and the pain, even when someone close to us betrays us, there is something in that Jesus wants to fulfill in our lives. Even when we go through the betrayal, the hurt, when someone that close that we entrust, someone that was in our personal space, even though it hurt us so bad, and that betrayal that they just did to us, the way they just kicked us in the face and stabbed us in the back, yet there was something in that Jesus wants to fulfill in our lives. There was something in that Jesus says, I want to come and fulfill something in the middle of that. Oh, that is so profound, that in the midst of the hurt and the pain, in the midst of the betrayal, in the midst of all that we feel deep in our emotions, there is something in that Jesus wants to fulfill. Oh, and let's think about that for a second. Here is David saying, this is such a close friend of mine. It is somebody I call a friend of mine, and yet look what he did to me. Oh, God have mercy. We sing the song and that we are friends of God. We say that we consider ourselves a friend of God. How many times has he allowed us to partake in his communion, to eat the bread, to drink the wine, which is the body and the blood of Christ? How many times have we partaken at the king's table? Yet how many times have we kicked the king in the mouth? How many times have we betrayed God? We consider ourselves a friend of God. How many times have we made promises to God? How many times have we said, God, for you I live and for you I die? Then we yet turn around and literally kick God in the mouth. Not literally, but in a sense through our actions, through our verbal response and through our actions in our lives, we have literally betrayed him. How many times has he felt betrayed that he entrusted us to bring us into his space? He allows us into his presence and to partake at his table through communion and to fellowship with him, to consider ourselves a friend of God. Yet how many times have we turned around and not fulfilled our commitment to God? How many times have we gave up on God? How many times have we thrown in the towel? Yet he says that we are a friend of his, a companion. Some of the older manuscripts, if you read the Jewish Tanakh, this verse says an ally. Now, an ally is someone that you entrust for a mutual benefit. See, there is something mutual that God wants, he sees something in us, that there is a mutual benefit. He said, yet we need him, but in turn he still needs us. Oh, God have mercy. See, we need God, but there is something he needs us for as well. See, he called us not just to call us, but there is a mutual benefit between our relationship. It's a reciprocating process that if we do for him, he will do for us. So there is a mutual benefit. We are an ally of God. Yet how many times have we, as an ally of God, that he considers us a friend and he sees a mutual benefit in our friendship? Yet how many times have we betrayed God? How many times have we treated him as a vicious horse and kicked the master in the face? See, this is a self-assessment thing. You have to ask yourself, God, how many times have I treated you as if I'm a vicious horse? Yet I consider myself a friend of God. And here, again, is David just crying out loud, whether it was through prayer or just out loud. The psalmist here, King David, after he describes his enemies, he says, yet my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, or yet a man of my own peace in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. And my friends, as you're reading this, I want you to take on the perspective as God saying this about us. Would God be reading verses 5 through 8 describing his enemies, the ones who he knows do not believe in him, the ones who say, I want nothing to do with God, the ones who say Jesus is not the Savior, the ones who do not believe that Jesus lived, died, and arose and is coming back, the ones who believe Jesus is not having salvation, the ones that say Jesus is not the way, Jesus is not the life, the ones that say he is not the living God, the ones who God knows who is his enemies. But then in turn reads verse 9 and says, yet the one who I trusted, the one who was a man or woman of my own peace, a man or a woman that came in my name, a man or a woman that I entrusted to partake in my Holy Communion, yet has lifted up his heel against me. Oh, my friends, I hope that this is something that we will read and do a quick self-assessment or self-evaluation. And if that is us, I pray that we will repent and ask God for forgiveness. He is so graceful and so merciful. But again, here is David just crying out loud, not realizing that what he was doing was so prophetic, and that it was so prophetic that as he went through that Jesus had to come and go through the same thing to fulfill this prophecy. So there are so many things in our life that we are going through that we don't realize that we are going through it, because there is something that Jesus wants to get the fulfillment out of, whatever it is that we are dealing with. So here we are with the Old Testament prophecy of Psalms 41, in the division of Psalms chapter 41 verse 9. And we see the fulfillment in this in the Gospel according to John. We are in the Gospel according to John. The Gospel according to John, the 13th chapter. And we're looking at specifically verse 18. The Gospel of John 13, verse 18. And it reads, I speak not of you all. So here is Jesus. He is with his disciples here, and in this chapter is where he was washing the disciples' feet. So he is with all the disciples, and he says, I speak not to you all, meaning I'm speaking, but this does not apply to you all. I know whom I've chosen. God have mercy. That is so profound, because he says, I know whom I've chosen, which means the one who was to portray Jesus was chosen for it. Oh my God, have mercy. Do you see that? He says, the one, I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled. He that eateth bread with me hath lifted up his heel against me. He knew who was right and who was not right. Those who are chosen to know Christ, and who was chosen to betray him. So here's the revelation that Christ knew from the beginning who was to betray him, which means there are people who are solely assigned. There are people whose assignment is to betray us. There are people who are assigned to lift up their heel against me, meaning there are people that are assigned to take up an action, not just to verbally come against us, but there are some people that are assigned to physically, through a physicality, through some type of physical action, they will betray us. God have mercy. But that is their assignment. See, Jesus says, I know who I have chosen. And he said, I speak not to you all. Meaning not everybody will betray him. He knows who he chose for him, and he knows who was chosen to betray him. He knew all along from the beginning. Yet he allowed this person into his space. He allowed this person around him. See, sometimes even when we know who the person will betray us, the question we have to ask ourselves, will we still allow the process to take its course? See, sometimes God will reveal who is our enemy and who is not. However, if that is their assignment, then the process has to take its course. And so, with that being said, if we know who would betray us, if we know who would take up that action against us, the question is, would we still allow the process to take its course? Because, see, this had to happen to fulfill the prophecy that was spoken in the old. It had to happen. See, and now in the New Testament, we see that he that lifted up his heel is now Judas. And just as with David, and the gentleman that was one of his official counselors that came to the table with the king. We see that same Old Testament passage now in the New Testament with Jesus and Judas. Judas was at the table with the king. He was at the table with the Messiah. He was at the table with Jesus. Yet he would betray him. He was considered a friend. He was one of the disciples. Yet Judas's assignment was to betray Jesus. Yet it had to happen to fulfill the prophecy. So again, there are some things that are going to happen into our lives that have to happen so that Jesus can get the fulfillment in it. So the question I leave us with tonight is, if we know who our enemy is, if God reveals who would betray us, would we still allow the process to take its course? Because if we don't allow the process to take its course, we now become a hindrance in the process that God has for our lives. See, Jesus, knowing who would betray him, didn't stop it. He didn't do anything to stop that process from taking its course. In fact, he allowed it to happen, for he knew the greater cause of what was to come. See, we have to realize that despite of what goes on, despite of who may come against us, there's a greater cause, and that there is a purpose in it, and there is a purpose for it. And there is something in that Jesus wants to fulfill in our lives. So I end the Jesus Revealed Day 11 tonight with the Old Testament prophecy from the division of Psalms, chapter 41, verse 9. And then we see the fulfillment in Jesus through the gospel according to John in the 13th chapter, verse 18. Again, please, I ask everybody to repost, reshare the YouTube link. Please leave comments on the videos. Hashtag Jesus Revealed. Again, the YouTube page is Jesus Revealed. This is day 11. Please, I encourage everybody, if this blesses you in any kind of way, if you have any questions, advice, or anything for me, please don't hesitate to leave a comment. You can inbox me on Facebook at Sean George, or the YouTube page, which is Jesus Revealed. Here we are at day 11. Again, I thank everybody for watching this, for viewing this. Please repost and reshare Jesus Revealed. God bless y'all.